At every turn in this crazy San Antonio police trial, the prosecution is trying to show that it conducted an in depth investigation, and the defense is trying to show that they missed a lot of things. Today, I don't think it went the prosecution's way, at least not the way they expected. Here's what we're talking about today. This is the trial of the three San Antonio police officers accused of murdering Melissa Perez. And today, the prosecution wanted to show how thorough it was in investigating this case because the defense has said all along they were sloppy, shoddy, rushed to judgment, never considered other options, never considered other opportunities. So today, they put on an expert in DNA.
Can you introduce yourself to the jury and spell your name for the court reporter, please?
Good morning. My name is Garon Foster, Garon Foster, Foster.
State.
Good morning. Mr. Foster, how have you made a living the last 30 years?
I was employed as a Bexar County forensic scientist for the last 30 years. I recently retired in February of this year. The last 18 years, I was a forensic scientist supervisor at the Bexar County Criminal Investigation Laboratory within our forensic serology DNA section.
Can you tell the jury a little bit about your education, your background, your training that qualified you for that position?
Yes, sir. From an educational standpoint, I received a bachelor's degree in zoological sciences from the University of Texas at Austin, a master's of science in forensic science from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. My entire career was with Bexar County, so it began with on-the-job training and then joining local as well as national and international organizations specifically within forensic science. Therefore, I was able to attend workshops to continue education in those areas. The educational requirements specifically in my area, which I had, was biochemistry, molecular biology, genetics, population genetics, as well as statistical analysis. A brief background then would be I hold a certificate from the American Board of Criminalistics in molecular biology. And then also while employed, I was licensed from the Texas Forensic Science Commission as required by law as a forensic analyst.
And in your 30 years applying your craft, has it all been here at the Bexar County Criminal Investigation Laboratory?
Yes, sir, it was.
And the lab itself, is it accredited by the Texas Forensic Science Commission?
Yes, the official accreditation comes from a different organization, but it is overseen by the Texas Forensic Science Commission. And yes, it is.
And as the forensic scientist supervisor, were you involved in making sure that the lab maintained the training and the protocols to stay accredited for the entirety of your time there?
Yes, sir, I did.
A couple of observations here. First of all, this guy has testified a lot. And you can tell that because he receives the question from the attorney, and then he turns to the jury and he smiles and he says, "Yes, I've been accredited. I've definitely gone through all this school, and I'm the pro from Dover when it comes to DNA." And that's a good thing. You want somebody who is confident without being cocky. That's this guy. You want somebody who knows their stuff. He certainly has the advanced degrees necessary to engage in this kind of analysis. And clearly, this lays a foundation for any opinion that he wants to give with respect to DNA analysis. So let's go on and see how the prosecution uses this.
And with respect to DNA analysis, you tell the jury what DNA analysis is and when it's done.
Yes, well, very briefly, DNA or deoxyribonucleic acid is a biological material. It's located in almost all of the cells of your body. It's inherited from your mother and your father. Its ultimate reasoning for being there is to help code or tell your body when to turn on certain proteins. And the DNA itself is the same in all of your cells. And my DNA is very similar to your DNA. We all need the same proteins or enzymes, basically our genetic makeup, but a small portion of it is different, or we call that polymorphic. There are different sizes of the DNA in small percentages. So 99% of my DNA is the same as yours. But that small percentage that's different, a forensic DNA analyst will examine those areas, and if sufficient DNA quantity and quality is available, create a discriminating profile to help determine who may or may not have been the donor of that biological fluid or stain.
I want to ask you about a submission under your lab number 23-03995. It's submitted to your lab in September of last year. You all had to be involved in testing from that submission.
Yes, sir, I do.
And what were you asked to do in the initial submission on September, or around September 16, 2024?
Yes, I received 4 different apparent bullet fragments, and I was asked to examine those for the possible presence of blood or any other tissue that ultimately would potentially lead to a genetic profile if there was biological material on those items.
Okay, I'm going to stop him right there because he goes through a long series and he takes out each one of these exhibits and he looks at it and says, yes, this is what this is. This was sent to me. I examined it. I swabbed it. He talks about all the steps that he goes through to do it. And at the end of that, this is the final question and final answer, at least as far as what that DNA evidence actually shows. I think you'll be amazed.
So when you did your serological testing on these 4 items and you swabbed each one of them, right?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
You retained those swabs for later DNA testing?
That is correct.
Okay, and you repackaged these bullets, fragments, in each envelope, put them back in the larger envelope.
That is correct.
And then did you seal it?
Yes, the envelope itself would be sealed. The individual smaller envelopes, as well as the larger envelope, would be tape sealed with my initials and the date in which I did the sealing.
Okay, and then would the item be routed back to the San Antonio Police Department for them to preserve and protect thereafter?
In most cases, yes. In this case, it would have been transferred to our firearms section so that Ms. Warden could do her analysis of it.
Thank you. Let's put these back together. Thank you. All right. Before you ended up doing any DNA testing on those items, on the swabs from those items, did you get an additional item to test?
Yes, sir, I did. I got one more envelope at a later date asking me to do the exact same analysis.
Okay. Let me show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 155. Have you seen that before?
Yes, sir, I do.
And how do you recognize it?
I recognize it again with our individual criminal investigation laboratory number. I do see the date as well as my initials and an item number that has been given by the crime laboratory.
Okay, and that envelope itself, what would it contain?
Inside here also would contain a smaller envelope, and inside that envelope would have been whatever item I was examining. In this case, another bullet fragment.
All right, let's take a look at night in there. You have removed an envelope that is marked States Exhibit 155A, correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And on the back of it, it has an E1 written on there. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And looking at this envelope, does this contain the bullet fragment that you were asked to identify if it had any biological material on it?
Yes, it does.
And you conducted the same examination. Did you find any biological material on that item?
No, so otherwise chemically it was negative. Visually I didn't see anything, but should there be any material that cannot be seen visually or tested chemically, a swab was taken as well to collect any potential biological material. But in essence, we would say all serological testing was negative.
Wait a minute. You're telling me you made the jury sit through all of that long explanation and all of that stuff about DNA and science and how qualified this guy is, and the guy is very qualified, no question about that. Only to tell the jury that you couldn't collect any DNA, there was no DNA recoverable from these bullet fragments? Why is this guy on the stand? Why are you putting him on the stand? Other than to show, hey, look, we covered all the bases. Except it doesn't exactly go the way you'd think it would go, and this is what you get.
Yes.
Mr. Foster. Hi.
Hello, Mr. Goss.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. Retired.
Yes, no, I know. I was going to tell you. I was going to tell you congrats on a well-earned retirement. You and I, we know each other. It seems like the most memorable cases I've ever had. You were a part of them somehow, and I've always appreciated that. I appreciate your testimony today. I'll just say I think you were fantastic at what you did, and I'm glad that you're able to retire and put that up. I did have just a few questions. Not really much. I think that you could say that some of your testimony is that really there's nothing that you have that you can offer that really tells us one way or another what happened as far as the bullet shipments. You agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and the I guess testing for the biological material. One of the things that I think you said was that you may have found that there may have been some, but it was not even enough that you could figure out, like for instance, if it was male or female.
That is correct.
Right. And because one of the things about, and you educate very well, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of like categories. Like what you would agree with me that when you're testing, one of the early things that you can see is like, is this a male or is it a female? Because it's XX or XY, right?
It is that is correct, but it depends if you're talking in a quantitation stage, and then there's additional testing that actually is the genetic profiling, and it is possible that one may not, or you may not be able to tell from a quantitation if it's male or female, because it could be in a background level. So regardless of the results, you may not be able to say male or female. But definitely when it came to genetic typing, that is the last step. If there is potential biological material, if there was male or female DNA present.
And the reason I ask that is I think one of the things you guys can rule, for instance, you have a profile, but you also need to go get a known standard from different people that may be involved in the case so that you can compare a profile to that known standard.
That's correct. So if you're asking, if I create a DNA profile from a crime scene sample, let's say blood that's identified on the floor, and we're able to see this is male or female DNA, and I have a profile, the question is, well, who may that be from? So when he mentions a standard, an individual will provide a buccal standard. So otherwise, if I had a swab, I can place it into my mouth. That's just the term buccal. And this known swab is used to have that known DNA. If the individual is deceased, then it may also be a buccal, or it could just be a blood sample taken. But that would be the known standard compared to, for example, in this case, the bullet fragments.
Right. And so if you were able to get a profile, the way the known standard works is you get an unknown profile if you were able to get one off the bullet. And then you get a known standard, and then I mean, this is simplistic, but you can compare it and see if they actually, if those two things match, or if they don't, right?
That is correct.
And I bring it up to say that in your 30 years, you would agree, and even in my 15, but in your 30, you would agree that that DNA, being able to extract and being able to get a profile, to get DNA out of a substance or out of material has come a long way.
That is correct in two ways. One, we've become extremely sensitive in what we were able to detect based on the procedures themselves. And the second thing is we've become extremely discriminating. So if there is DNA present, discriminating, who may or may not be the donor of that.
Then, again, because they're tag teaming this, the third defense attorney gets up and has his way with the DNA expert on the timing of the submissions.
Much left for me to ask after the first three lawyers, but I wanted to get some clarity on some dates. I know you were kind of later into this case. As far as submissions go, the lab tests items when they are sent in by an agency, right?
That is correct.
And so in this case, Detective Soto ostensibly is in charge of submissions to the lab as he sees fit, right?
I believe he was the detective at the time responsible, but yes, he or another individual would be responsible for deciding what items of evidence are sent to a crime laboratory.
And when those get submitted, right? As far as the
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And so that's what I wanted to get some clarity on. So you received a total of 5 bullet fragments for testing, correct?
For DNA analysis, that is correct.
In your section. And so I want to get the dates right here because there's 2 different submission dates for your section for testing for the bullet fragments, right?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. And so the first one, do I have it right that September 12th of 2024 was the first submission your section received in this case?
That is correct.
Okay, so we'll do first DNA was 9/12/2024. And so that's over a year after the offense date in this case, correct?
I'm not aware. I don't recall the offense date at this time.
If I told you it was June 23rd of 2023, that would be more than a year prior to the submission of your section, right?
That's correct. It's about 14, 15 months.
Okay, so we'll stick it here on the demonstrative states 184. And Ms. Warden helped me kind of walk through the same dates here. So that's the first submission. And then you get a second submission. Do I have it right that came on September 30th of 2024?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Okay, I'll put second DNA. We'll do 9/30/2024. And when you get these fragments, does your section sometimes identify fragments with an SAPD evidence number?
Yes, it will always be associated with whatever law enforcement
Okay.
agency number there is.
And so for the first submission, September 12th, there are a number of SAPD numbers that correspond to the fragments that came in, right?
I'm only aware of one San Antonio Police Department case number.
Oh, the case number. I may have misspoken. So is there sometimes a evidence item number that's referred to?
Yes, so the San Antonio Police Department or any other law enforcement agency, they may have their own numbering identification. It's not uncommon to start with an E, for example, say E1, E2, E3. Now that may be different than the laboratory's numbering system, but yes, it is customary for them to have that.
Okay. And so if a bullet fragment was sent to you that, say, came from autopsy, that would have some corresponding number with it, correct? Like that evidence barcode number.
Yes, I would fully expect the law enforcement agency to have that barcode associated with it.
And we talked about the order of testing. If a year prior, Firearms and Tool Marks had done testing on a bullet fragment, that would necessarily compromise the potential availability of DNA evidence, wouldn't it?
It would be possible, yes.
Okay. And because, and you may know this, in firearms, they handle the fragments, right? They may even clean them off.
Exactly. They do handle it, and if they're looking for the individual markings on the bullet, the striation marks, the possibility exists that may need to clean them so they can visualize them.
Okay, so if we had a submission in September 2023 of a projectile and that testing was done a year later, you would expect that could influence what DNA you may or may not find.
If somebody else had handled the bullet, as an example, and possibly cleaned it, then the answer is yes, that would be possible to affect the results that I would receive.
So what's the net effect of all of this testimony? Well, first of all, the DNA doesn't advance the prosecution's case at all, and there are a few nits that the defense can pick here, but the bottom line is both of these people have been beating dead horses in front of the jury. DNA is not important in this case. There is absolutely no reason to argue with it. The proper response in this case to the DNA testimony here would have been for each of the defense attorneys to say, absent any DNA acquired from that, Your Honor, we have no questions. And that would have been it. And they could have saved the jury some time. But instead, they kind of put them through a long ordeal for really not much gain whatsoever. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you being here today. If you have the opportunity today, try to do one kind thing to help somebody else. Any kind thing will do. Buy somebody a Coke, get them a cup of coffee. Anything that makes their day better, that would be a way to help make the world a better place. Because after all, isn't that what we're all after? Now, YouTube has a few things that they think you might be interested in, and they're going to be showing you that right up there.